So as Charlie said, I'm following on from Nolan's talk really about how we can plan our Corona Christmas in hopefully a way that's quite simple. Nolan spoke of planning paralysis, and I think that for all of us that have been in church leadership over the last little while, there have been moments when we feel that either we don't know what we're doing or we can't really see a way forward. And one of the key things that I found in recent weeks that we need to address this is about managing expectation. And I think that there's no time where there is greater expectation of the church than at Christmas time. All of us will have benefices or churches that have certain traditions, the things that have always happened in the village. And even our PCCs who have been through risk assessment processes with us, despite having been through all that, there'll still be moments when they still expect the normal Christmas to be going forward. And then, of course, there are those that are really beyond our church communities in the villages who perhaps only come to church at Christmas time or only come to the crib service. And they may not know the changes that we've had to make inside the churches. Particularly, I found with regard to singing, even though some of my congregations have known and been back worshipping for a couple of months now and haven't been able to sing a hymn, they're still surprised when I say that perhaps we won't be having a carol service this year. The next thing that we need to look at is reviewing our plans in our own context, and then in light of ever shifting regulations to think about what we can and can't be done. And I'm in the position, I have 8 rural churches in my group. And so we would be in traditionally be in a situation where there would be 8 carol services, 8 Christmas communions, a couple of Christingles and everything else that goes along with it. So there's a lot this year that we can't do, but hopefully as we go through this little talk, you'll be able to see what we can do. And finally, I think that what is going to be key is involving others early in order to facilitate what we plan and help it to move forward. And in this, I think it's very important to perhaps find members in our community, members of the community, so that church doesn't get sidelined in more secular plans that could be made in the next few weeks and definitely as we move towards December. And we'll need to think about how we're going to communicate what we're planning in church outward. So thinking about what we're going to publicise. And we need to work well with others from our communities. I think I just said in the breakout group that I was in, one of the real bonuses of this Corona time has been the growth in community action groups. And maybe they're things that we can tap into in the coming weeks. So the traffic lights. It really is as simple as taking 3 felt tip pens. I don't have any rocket science to share with you here. So first of all, looking at your previous year's Christmas offering, if you like, by looking at things that can only possibly go ahead with significant change to previous practice or a significant easing in terms of COVID restrictions. And if we're honest, these are now very unlikely to happen. And when I started thinking about this in my group, this would have been, say, 4 or 5 weeks ago. The choir had just started rehearsing again, and I was hopeful that we may get congregational singing before Christmas. But again, I think that is very, very unlikely to happen now. With my orange felt tip pen, well, what could go ahead in church under the current restrictions? And in my context, they will be things that will really only be advertised internally to our church family or our regular congregations. And then after I'd done that, I had to look at what I can colour green, what could go ahead and be publicised regardless of the COVID situation. And they're the things that we need to look at doing really well, as Nolan mentioned in his talk. So this last year was my services in church. It was quite a busy month. And I'm very glad that I have a great team that were working with me. So I wasn't doing all this on my own. But starting to think about the different colours, it started to look a little bit more like this. So I've got some services that are in red, as you can see, carol services and crib services that traditionally have full village churches. We're not going to be able to do them. But then the traditional services of communion over Christmas, well, at the moment, if we had the same size congregations as we had last year, we would be able to accommodate those with social distancing. And then at the very beginning of the chart, coming down this side, there's a whole line of things that perhaps weren't on many of our agendas last year. So they're the services that I can't do in church this year, which I'll be planning to move online this year. And they're the ones that will be in my village Christmas cards to share with the communities as well. But then the final thing that we need to do after that is look at some of those moments where there is community engagement. So the carol services and the crib services, where the community would gather back in church, and think about how can I change some of those ideas creatively and imaginatively to engage my community beyond what I've done traditionally. And I hope that those of you that are in some groups tonight or can see the Padlet boards later will be able to think of some ideas that you could use to engage with your community over and above what you've done before. So finally, we go back to managing expectation. So we're thinking about how we can tell the story and creatively reimagine the way we connect with our communities so that they still hear that story of the greater crown this Christmas. How can we change some of those red activities into green activities? And then what do we need to review in relation to our context and changing regulations? But then also looking at that, at what we can do in the spirit of the current regulations, rather than just trying to think about what we're going to get away with. And finally, who is actually going to do this? If we're moving services online, we need to engage people from our church communities and our village communities very early. And as Nolan said, this takes a lot of time. So we're probably realistically going to have to start thinking about recording services in November. And finally, how can we communicate this well? How can we involve those from our village communities that are not part of our church communities? And how can we bring others on board to help us? And how, finally, are we going to publicise what we're doing so that the church is in the middle of the Christmas in our communities rather than shut away in a building by ourselves? And that's my 5 minute splurge in between. I hope it was helpful.